how beings experience confusion. By failing to understand that such a ground is the way of abiding, beings fall under the influence of karma and stray into confusion in one or another of the three realms, experiencing various pleasures and pains. The Tantra Without Letters states, all beings of the three realms stray from the ground of being, which is not anything at all, into every possible state of confusion. According to the heart essence of secrets, how marvelous, given that there is Buddha nature, one's thoughts flow as a result of karma. In myriad lifetimes, one's body, experiences, environment, and suffering are perceived distinctly as I and mine. Page 341 from the section on the Vajra heart essence, the precious treasury of philosophical systems, Longchen Rabjam, otherwise known as Longchenpa. Welcome to episode 41 of the 12-Step Buddhist podcast. Comfortable in Your Own Skin is the title of today's episode. Now, I'll get into that in just a moment, but speaking to the teaching that I read from, you can find out about Longchenpa. In fact, his translations, I'm pretty sure I'm accurate about this. Dr. Herbert Gunther, who was the dissertation advisor for Jim Valby, one of my main teachers in the Dzogchen community. Dr. Gunther translated 3 classic texts of Longchenpa, and I think those were among the first of the Tibetan texts to be translated into English. And I'm not sure those were super awesome and fluid. I have them. I've read some of them. But I like this translation, which is done much later. I think this might be 2006. I have to double check. But this one is through the Nyingma tradition. And Padma Publishing, 2007. Translated by Richard Barron, Lama Choki Nyima. So this, when I read this, is the clearest of any, this is the clearest of any text that I have, that I've come in contact with. But something about the notion, as I do as I practice getting comfortable in my own skin, being comfortable in my own body. As an addict, I just had 21 years clean and sober on December 4th. This is 2018 for those listening in the future. And, I'm in my own home after a couple of years of not having my own space after the divorce and going back and forth and just renting rooms and living with filthy people. You can't cook and you can't enjoy being there, and it's like, oh my God, I was so displaced and in such a state of high distress, well, really for the better part of 5 years here in San Diego. So I'm in this space now that somehow miraculously, I don't even know how this all happened, but things were super bad and super shitty, and just financially and just in terms of my home space and what have you. And one thing led to another. I won't go into all the details of that, but one thing led to another, and I had to leave the place I was in. And I just wound up saying, fuck it, I'm going to do what I got to do. I'll drive Uber day and night. I'll work on my books in between Ubering and so forth. So that's what I've been doing. And I've got this space, which I post a lot of pictures on social media and so forth. And you can find me on Instagram, 12-Step Buddhist. Friend me on Facebook. I've still got space in my friends list there. But I've got the dog and the cat and the yard, and I've made this a temple. I keep it perfectly clean, and I cook here. I buy groceries. One thing that just makes me feel like a human being is going to the grocery store and getting what I want to eat, and putting it away where I want it and preparing it how I want it and cleaning up after myself, that's just kind of a really big deal to me. And learning to be appreciative of that opportunity, whereas maybe I didn't appreciate, maybe I took that for granted for most of my life, because I've never had to live with roommates in my entire life. And as weird as things had ever been in my life prior to this past few years, I always had a place and I always had a space, and I never felt displaced, if that makes sense. I never felt like I had nowhere and I had no one. It's a really strange feeling, and I imagine this is how homeless people might feel. If you are out in the world and you have no direction, Bob Dylan says that like no direction home, like a complete unknown, like a rolling stone. And maybe some people do that intentionally. They want to live the nomadic lifestyle, or they just give up on whatever capitalist society or something, and they just want to wander. But I've never had that experience. So anyways, being here in this space, I wake up, and usually if I have time, I will go out I'll get a little front yard with a little table and chairs, and I got the blue sky, and I do my 9 breathings practice to balance and coordinate my energy. And I can teach that, actually. I did take some trainings in that, and I am allowed to teach that 9 breathings, which I do teach it in my yoga classes. And I think, in fact, that I think I did record that. So you can look at the 12stepbuddhist.com/free-meditations, and I'll put that up. That's for podcast listeners only. You can share it, but I just don't have that link available on the site. It's just my recordings of meditations that I teach before yoga. But I do this practice in the morning to get comfortable in my own skin, because I wake up with horrific PTSD a lot of the time. And, just taking the time to be here in my body, comfortable in my own skin, as we would say in AA, right? And, trying to process through the PTSD. Like, for example, I woke up this morning and there's this feeling, and I can't, if someone asked me to describe it, I'll just say it's the feeling of like that you wake up in a coffin. It's the feeling that you wake up and you're dead, and you can't go anywhere, and you can't do anything, and you're just left in this. It's a horrible feeling. It's not a good state of mind to be in. So I wake up with that often in some form or another. And, I had this present before I met my ex-wife, and before I got super entangled in the borderline, psychopathy, of her shame core and projection into my, weaknesses and vulnerabilities, really playing on my existing condition, my existing, addiction, and capitalizing on my weakness, which is my compassion. That's really scrambled my brain. But I already had conditions before I ever met her, and I got to own that, right? I already had a lifetime of chaos before I met any. So, who we are brings us to where we are, right? So that doesn't excuse the behaviors of someone who's cruel and intentionally enjoys your suffering. Obviously, it doesn't change that reality. But the karma is mine. The karma is mine. And ultimately, in the teaching, I can't blame anyone else, even if it looks like it's all coming from somewhere else. It's all coming from my karma. It's all coming from my past actions, intentions, and satisfactions, as I've written about extensively. I think I just put an article up on the 12-Step Buddhist on karma. You can check that out. That was an excerpt, I think. Yeah, it was an excerpt from the Yoga of Being a Badass, which I've had to pause on finishing that. I was really deep into some really interesting research on that. But the 12-Step Buddhist 10-year anniversary edition is due, and I'm working on bringing everybody up to speed on what's happened since 2009. And that's the priority for the moment. But the point being that I do this practice to sit in my own, rather than run, rather than take a substance or participate in an addiction, where, for me, being clean and sober all this time, the addictive process it's still work. It's still operating, and it's still functioning, in that, I don't get up and take a bong hit or a drink or a line or something But I do get up and check my phone. I do wake up and text. If I'm suffering, I'm in that state of waking up and being in pain, I will reach out to a number of people on my support team. So instead of just doing that, and I'm not saying that's necessarily an addiction, but it is a compulsion. It is like a survival instinct. Addiction is probably connected to the survival modality of the brain, the way the reward system operates in the brain. But, and I was just thinking, it is also connected to attachment from Bowlby's attachment theory, which I will be talking about in the 12-Step Buddhist 10-year anniversary, as well as some other works, particularly I'm not sure exactly where that's going to fit in, but that piece is really interesting and really important, because the idea that you don't have a healthy attachment, secure attachment to a loving caregiver, means, according to one paper, that, say if you become addicted to heroin, well, you're attached to the heroin, you're attached to the process of being an addict, you're addicted to the addiction, right? Because it's a substitute attachment, because you don't have a healthy, secure attachment in early childhood, in early development. So the attachment theory that we need to have a loving, caring, stable relationship that's supportive and yet loose enough to let you explore, in order to develop our sense of going out into the world. Otherwise, we feel insecure in the world. So this is connected to addiction. The process, or the compulsion, or the reaction of taking an action is let's say the opposite of being present and being still in one's own body. And I was just having a conversation about this with a PhD lady that I'm working with to develop some compassion training stuff. We're talking about this idea of being sitting still and being present, and being an empath, being empathic, being hypersensitive and hyper aware as an addict, and having an overwhelming experience of not only your own emotions, your own emotional state, but the energetic and emotional state emitted by others. So we have a gift, which from a shamanic perspective is a skill to be developed, but we don't have the support or acknowledgement of it in our culture. So we're kind of basically ostracized. We feel alienated. And this is a theory, that we have this feeling of others and all kinds of pain and suffering of our own, and it all compounds and causes us to be uncomfortable in our own skin. And that that thing that we talked about in AA about this, facing the, I don't have the quote exactly right, but the intolerable consciousness of our situation. The intolerable, our conscious, to be conscious is intolerable. To be conscious is to suffer. To be separate from is to suffer. And this is Dharma. This is Buddhism. This is what I read in the quote. That separation of that sense of I and mine. And this is the heart of all the teachings on bodhicitta and the path of the bodhisattva. This sense of separation, this duality, But practicing sitting still, and let's say a Zen practice, for example, and we're talking about that, where you don't have any psychology, you don't have any foundation. It's from a Japanese culture. You don't really have the ability to acknowledge your feelings. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like unhealthy that you sit still and you're being present and you're vibrating with all of this fucking intensity of your own PTSD and your own past and all the vibes of everyone around you. And that's why you need Sangha. And that's why you need Sangha that's conscious and aware. Buddha, the teaching, Dharma, or Buddha, the teacher, Dharma, the teaching, and Sangha, the community. You need all of these to be super supportive. And that's why I want to create the fellowship I crave with Compassionate Recovery, because, I want to kind of set up the guidelines as the way I'm understanding and interpreting and synthesizing all of the teachings from all of the years that I've been around. And I don't think anybody else is going to see it this way, so I'm doing it, and it's important. And I think this is channeling wisdom, honestly. I think this is channeling from Buddhas and angelic transmissions and so forth. So I haven't have any way to prove that, but it's a very, very strong voice guiding me to do this work for compassionate recovery. And that'll be out at the end of 2019 or the beginning of 2020. And that's going to be a whole new program of recovery. But, getting to the point of, being in a Sangha where people understand each other, understand what's happening, the teacher understands their own psychology, and obviously this is just really weird and really hard. And I know their therapeutic communities are not, there are Sanghas that are therapeutic in that regard, and they do try to work on it. And I'm not privy to everything that everyone's doing, but I haven't personally had the experience of having much of that, except for in AA, which it's a lot of, it's a lot of blind leading the blind and a lot of toxicity and so forth. So the idea being that when we sit still, it's intolerable. When we're present too, it's intolerable. That's why we take an action. So when I sit in the intolerable suffering of existence, and the nature of being, look, I talk to a lot of people. I've had over like thousands of rides in my Uber, and I talk to people all the time. And a lot of times, in training and teaching yoga and teaching retreats for years and all this, and being in recovery for like over 30 years, I feel like I've interviewed a lot of people on my thoughts, and like what they think and feel too, It's not the common perception that we suffer. If you talk to people in the world and you say, "Hey, I suffer," they're going to go, "Oh, why? What do you do? Do something different," or whatever. They're not going to understand that, Buddha said the nature is suffering. Life is suffering. To be alive is to suffer. This is the desire realm. We suffer because we're attached. We're attached because we're clinging. We're clinging because we have desire. The desire is suffering. The thirst can never be quenched. As we say in AA, one is too much, 1,000 is not enough. Chuck Chamberlain used to say, if there was a river of whiskey right there, a river of whiskey, it wouldn't be enough. So this is the same state as all beings. All beings, like it says. I'm going to put my glasses back on and pull this teaching back out and read it to you, because, this is the situation. Even though most people in the world are not going to be aware of this, unless you come to Dharma, unless you come to a practice where you start to understand your confusion, and maybe you're going to have some problems which lead you to looking for a Dharma practice, right? But most people don't think they suffer. Unless they get some kind of serious illness or loss in the family or major life catastrophe. Beings fall under the influence of karma and stray into confusion in one or another of the three realms, experiencing various pleasures and pains. So even pleasure. Given that there is Buddha nature, one's thoughts flow as a result of karma. So the idea here that there is something called this is the way of abiding. This is the way of abiding in the nature of mind. But and you do need a real master to give you those teachings and transmissions. I'm just a practitioner, but the notion that we're discussing today is being comfortable in our own skin, being able to be present. And how, as an addict, it's obvious that it's uncomfortable and intolerable. As a typical person who's not aware of the Dharma, not aware of their situation, we just stumble from one pleasure in avoiding pain and another pleasure in avoiding pain. And we're not even aware. We don't even know that we're in samsara. We're in a dream that we think we're at the mall and we've got our credit card and we're getting what we need and we're going to another store and getting more stuff, and then we're stopping at the food court. And when we get home with all of our bags and all of our stuff, and since it's Christmas season, do you guys know the feeling of getting so many gifts and everything at the end of the night, and you go lay down in bed and you're like fucking overwhelmed? You're like overstimulated from the experience of getting all the stuff isn't enough. Anyways, if you're a contemplative like me, this stuff is obvious, or obvious. It's there. It's like a raw nerve, If you're not someone who's got the eye of Dharma or the thirst for the spiritual thirst, then maybe you're not aware of these things. But I assume you're listening to this podcast because you have, some of that going on. But just to notice that if you tell people, hey, sit still, and then you're going to notice that you're suffering, a lot of people are not going to get that. A lot of people are not going to even be able to acknowledge that unless they sit still long enough. Where the addict knows that. We know that. We know that life is suffering, day one. And it's not just that we're assholes who are negative and not thinking positive. It's not just because we're creating our own bullshit, which we are, but it's no different from any other being. All beings suffer from this. All conscious beings. We are in the state of confusion, the influence of karma. So, if there's karma, which is cause and effect, there's the way of abiding in Buddha nature. Let's call it Buddha nature for lack of another term right now. I was just listening to a Lama Lina teaching, and she was talking about this Dharmakaya, or this infinite space, this how you perceive and what perspective you perceive from. Let's just say there's a state of infinite peace. Let's just say there's the calm abiding in pervasive, timeless awareness. Let's just say there's the omniscient state of the Buddha free from suffering. And it's empty and it's nothing. It's like the teaching that I read. It says, which is nothing. We stray from our basic nature, which is nothing at all. It's nothing at all. But the mind wants something. The mind wants to move. Mind wants to... And this is what she was saying in the teaching. This is unstable. The awareness is unstable because in the physical realm, in the physical dimension, everything's moving. So the everything that's moving is karma, and the nothing is the realized state of all Buddhas. And I realize that's heavy, and that may not make sense to you, but if you're interested in that, you can pursue it. You can follow. There are teachings. There are teachers. But this is what we're talking about. So being comfortable for me to wake up and be comfortable in my own body, speech, and mind is to have my PTSD, wake up, go do my 9 breathings, coordinate my energy, do the purification of the elements to coordinate my energy and purify and stabilize my awareness, and then to work at relaxing the mind into discovering the nature of mind. And this is Ati Yoga. This is the highest level teaching. There's no teaching beyond this. And it's really beyond concepts. And again, this requires a master for you to follow. But this is what I do, and this is where I'm at, and this is what I can share with you. And it's really not, it's really there in the sutra teachings. It's just, it may not be obvious unless you understand. But it is there. I mean, if I was reading it was either the Sangata Sutra or the Sutra of Golden Light the other day, and whoa, boom. I mean, it fucking hits you. Boom. I mean, the dose of Dharma is there. It's just the way of explaining and the different types of ways that you get the transmissions, may or may not be all-inclusive. So being comfortable in our own skin means to sit in presence and allow everything to arise and pass away. So I practice that. I wake up, I do my 9 breathings, I do my purification of the elements, and I relax in the gaze into the sky and ask, as Guru Padmasambhava said, I think the book I have to reference that later, but there's Perception Through Seeing with Naked Awareness, I think is what that one's called. The author, double check that one, but I can get that if you want it. You just email me. But the question is, will you look at the blue sky and ask, is my mind like that? Is the nature of mind infinite and pure emptiness? Is the nature of mind nothing at all, as Longchenpa quotes? we stray from, pure awareness, which is nothing at all. So the mind freaks out at the notion of nothing at all. The mind must have something. And this is the same compulsion. Is what I'm saying to you is that we're all addicts. It's just that there's attachment on one end of the spectrum, which you can become aware of through dedicated practice of years and years of sitting still or whatever, practicing yoga, however you enter the path. And you become aware that you're as bad of a crackhead you're as bad of a crackhead at grasping at your presumably inherently existent sense of self. You're as bad of a crackhead as a crackhead. You're as bad of a crackhead as a crackhead. But you won't see it that way, and you'll think I'm crazy for talking like that, and you'd be offended if I said that to you. But that's what the practice is, and that's the way I view it and the way I see it, is getting comfortable in our own skin. Means being able to sit as still and present as a Buddha while the entire universe in all its insanity manifests around you. Being aware and not like ignoring it, and it's naked awareness. In vast, immense emptiness, in infinite space, everything manifests. Boom. Being in that stable awareness is the path. Practicing that is the path. Attaining that is the liberation. So, if I can remember any of this while I'm suffering and struggling and wandering through samsara and bouncing, and stumbling and tumbling and being caught up in the influence of karma, as my teacher Jim had said, the push and pull of karma. There's the push and pull of karma, and there's pure, lucid, utter emptiness. And those are words, and you have to experience that. But that's comfortable in your own skin. That's comfortable no matter what craziness. That's comfortable no matter what suffering. That's comfortable no matter what situation, internally, externally, mentally, financially, physically. And that's what I try to practice. I wake up, I got the PTSD. I try to sit in that presence, and then from that perspective, go do my day. Okay, you guys, working on that 10-year anniversary edition. Could you please go down and go to Amazon and review Perfect Practice? I redid that book. I didn't get any new reviews on it. I redid it from the beginning to the end. There's a lot of new material, new cover, new subtitle. It's a basic meditation guide in a lot of respects on the 6 perfections or the 6 paramitas. Check that out. I think it's like $3 or $4 or something like that. I've got the yoga of letting go, which is an amazing. I really, really like how that came out, and the teachings I found in that, and the practices that I put in that, I think are really, really good. And of course, the yoga of self-compassion. And I'll get the yoga of being a badass out as soon as I finish these other things and get moving. But there's a lot of cool, good stuff going on in the future. I've been a little delayed in doing my weekly podcast, so I forced myself to sit and do this one because I'm really caught up in Ubering for the bills and just working on balancing my own energy and trying to practice what I'm talking about and be comfortable in my own skin as I go through the healing process of what it's been like since 2013, 14, basically. So that's that, you guys. Happy holidays and all that good stuff. Shoot me an email, darrenblittlejohn@gmail.com. Say hello. Get on the email list. Go to the 12stepbuddhist.com for updates, blog articles. I'm going through that whole site as we go, and redoing things and updating things and adding new blog posts. Share the podcast, if you will. Facebook was kind of weird about how it was letting you share things unless you pay for boosting it and so forth. So some of the downloads went down, but I think they went back up. Grab the books on Amazon, and check me out on Instagram, 12-Step Buddhist. Say hello, and peace out and namaste.